Have you ever sat quietly under the night sky, gazing up at the stars, and asked yourself, why am I here? What is the meaning of all this? If you've ever found yourself lost in such questions, you are not alone. For thousands of years, the greatest minds in history have pondered these same mysteries. In this video, we will gently drift through the most profound questions ever asked in philosophy, from the meaning of life, to the nature of reality, to the ethics that guide our choices. We'll explore the ideas that have shaped civilizations and continue to challenge the human mind, all in a calm, soothing journey that helps you fall asleep while expanding your mind. So lay back, take a deep breath, and let the timeless questions of the universe wash over you. The birth of philosophical thought. Long before the word philosophy was coined, humans were already seeking answers to life's biggest questions. They observed the world around them, the sun's path through the sky, the rhythm of the seasons, the cycles of birth and death, and they wondered, why does anything exist at all? What lies beyond the stars? Who am I? The earliest philosophical inquiries weren't written in books, but told through stories. Myths passed from generation to generation. These myths explained the unknown with gods and heroes, with battles between light and darkness, order and chaos. In ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, and India, creation myths sought to explain the origins of the world, often reflecting the societies that imagined them. But something extraordinary happened in the 6th century BCE, in a region called Ionia, in what is now Western Turkey. A group of thinkers began to ask a new kind of question. Instead of explaining the world through myths, they sought natural explanations, logical, observable causes. This was the birth of philosophy as we know it. Thales of Miletus, often regarded as the first philosopher, proposed that water was the fundamental substance of all things, not because a god declared it so, but because he observed its essential role in life. To modern ears, it might sound simplistic, but it marked a turning point, a shift from myth to reason. Anaximander, his student, disagreed. He proposed a more abstract concept, the apeiron, or the boundless, an indefinite principle from which everything arises. Anaximenes suggested air was the primary element, compressing and rarefying to form all matter. These early thinkers were the first to challenge inherited wisdom and to construct theories based on reason and observation. They weren't always right, but they were revolutionary. Soon, these questions expanded from the physical to the metaphysical. What is reality? One of the most enduring questions in philosophy is deceptively simple. What is real? Heraclitus, another pre-Socratic philosopher, famously said, "You cannot step into the same river twice." He believed the essence of the universe was change, constant, relentless change. Everything flows, nothing remains. But Parmenides of Elea saw it differently. He argued that change is an illusion. According to Parmenides, reality is unchanging, eternal, and indivisible. Our senses deceive us, he claimed, and only reason can uncover truth. This debate between a world in flux and a world of permanence continues to echo in philosophical thought. Which is more real, the world we see changing every day, or some deeper, hidden reality beneath it? These early metaphysical questions would later blossom into more sophisticated theories, particularly in the hands of two of the most influential philosophers of all time, Plato and Aristotle. The world of forms, Plato's vision. Plato, a student of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle, introduced a theory that remains one of the cornerstones of Western philosophy, the theory of forms. Plato believed that the material world is not the real world. Everything we see, hear, and touch is merely a shadow of the true, eternal forms. There is a perfect form of everything: beauty, justice, even a chair. These forms exist in a higher realm, unchanging and absolute. Our world is just a reflection, an imperfect copy. According to Plato, the purpose of philosophy is to remember the world of forms. Yes, remember. He believed that our souls came from that realm, and that through reasoning, contemplation, and education, we can recall the truths we once knew. His famous allegory of the cave, found in the Republic, paints this vividly. Prisoners chained inside a cave can only see shadows on the wall, cast by objects behind them. One prisoner escapes and sees the outside world, realizing the shadows were mere illusions. Returning to the cave, he tries to explain the truth, but the others ridicule him. Plato's message is clear. Most people live in ignorance, mistaking shadows for reality. The philosopher's job is to seek the light and then share it. Aristotle and the roots of logic. Plato's student, Aristotle, took a different path. He believed that reality is found in the physical world, not some higher realm. He was a master of categorization, analysis, and observation. Where Plato looked up, Aristotle looked around. Aristotle is often considered the father of logic and empirical science. He developed systems to understand everything from ethics to biology, from politics to poetics. His emphasis on observation laid the groundwork for the scientific method. For Aristotle, every object has a purpose, a telos. A seed's purpose is to become a tree. A knife's purpose is to cut. Human beings too have a purpose: to achieve eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or fulfillment. And this comes through living a life of virtue, guided by reason. He believed in the golden mean. Virtue lies between two extremes. Courage, for instance, lies between cowardice and recklessness. Wisdom lies between ignorance and arrogance. In Aristotle, we see philosophy's power not just to question the cosmos, but to shape how we live. The ethics of being. How should we live? As the early philosophers explored the nature of reality, another profound question began to emerge. How should we live? This is the heart of ethics, also known as moral philosophy. Socrates, Plato's teacher, stands at the beginning of this conversation. Though he wrote nothing himself, his teachings live on through Plato's dialogues, where Socrates appears as a relentless questioner, probing the beliefs of his fellow citizens. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. He spent his days in the public square, asking questions like, what is justice? What is virtue? Can one be good without knowing what good is? He challenged the powerful, the confident, and the self-assured, exposing contradictions in their thinking. This ultimately led to his trial and execution for corrupting the youth of Athens and impiety. Yet Socrates accepted his fate calmly, believing that a just man must never do wrong, even in response to wrongdoing. His legacy is not a set of answers, but a method, the Socratic method. A way of seeking truth by asking questions, examining assumptions, and embracing the possibility of being wrong. Virtue and happiness, from Socrates to the Stoics. Following Socrates, different schools of ethics began to develop, each with its own vision of the good life. Plato envisioned a society ruled by philosopher kings, where justice prevailed through the harmony of reason, spirit, and appetite within the soul. Aristotle, as mentioned, emphasized flourishing, eudaimonia, achieved through virtuous activity in accordance with reason. Virtue wasn't a set of rules, but a habit, cultivated through practice. Then came the Stoics, like Epictetus, Seneca, and the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. They taught that happiness comes not from wealth or pleasure, but from living in accordance with nature and reason. We cannot control external events, only our own responses. To the Stoic, the key to a good life is inner peace, achieved by mastering one's desires and judgments. Imagine the calm mind of Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire yet writing quietly to himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Epicurus and the ethics of pleasure. In contrast to the Stoics, Epicurus proposed that pleasure is the highest good, but not the kind of wild indulgence people often imagine. Epicurus believed in simple pleasures, friendship, contemplation, the absence of pain. He warned that unchecked desires lead to suffering, and that wisdom is learning which pleasures are truly worth pursuing. In his famous garden school, he and his followers lived simply, pursuing tranquility and friendship. For Epicurus, a quiet life was the happiest one. The skeptics and the search for certainty. As philosophy progressed, some thinkers began to question whether we can know anything with certainty at all. The skeptics, such as Pyrrho of Elis, believed that we should suspend judgment on all matters because certainty is impossible. If we cannot be sure of what is true, then peace of mind comes from letting go of the need to be right. Later, in the 3rd century, the Roman thinker Sextus Empiricus expanded this view. He argued that dogmatic belief causes distress and that suspending belief leads to tranquility. This radical doubt would later inspire thinkers like René Descartes, who sought to rebuild knowledge from the ground up. The rise of religious philosophy. As Greek philosophy spread, it began to merge with emerging religious traditions. In the Middle East, Neoplatonism influenced early Christian thinkers like Augustine of Hippo. In the Islamic world, philosophers like Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and Averroes, Ibn Rushd, integrated Aristotle's thought with Islamic theology. These thinkers asked, can faith and reason coexist? Can we know God through logic or only through revelation? In medieval Europe, Thomas Aquinas sought to reconcile Christian doctrine with Aristotelian philosophy. He argued that reason and faith are both paths to truth, and that natural law, moral principles discoverable through reason, reflects divine order. In the East, philosophical traditions were also flourishing. Confucius in China emphasized ethical relationships, respect, and duty as the path to harmony. In India, schools like Vedanta, Samkhya, and Buddhism explored the nature of the self, the mind, and liberation from suffering. What is the self? As questions of ethics and belief deepened, so too did questions of identity. What is the self? Who are you, really? In Hindu philosophy, the self, Atman, is ultimately identical with Brahman, the infinite reality. The journey of life is to realize this oneness, shedding illusion. Buddhism, however, offers a radically different view. There is no permanent self. According to the doctrine of anatta, the self is an illusion, a bundle of changing elements: body, feeling, perception, thoughts, and consciousness. Clinging to this illusion causes suffering. Liberation, or nirvana, comes from letting go. These ideas challenge our most basic intuitions. If the self is an illusion, who is asking the question? The mystery deepens. And so the questions continue. Each answer leads to more questions, more layers, more mystery. Are we rational beings, or driven by emotion? Are we free, or determined by forces beyond our control? Is morality universal or relative to culture? What makes a life meaningful? In the next part of our journey, we will explore the dawn of modern philosophy and the revolutionary ideas that reshaped how we understand knowledge, consciousness, and the limits of human reason. Doubt and reason. The age of modern philosophy. The Renaissance marked the rebirth of classical ideas, but it also gave rise to a bold new spirit of inquiry. As scientific discoveries reshaped our understanding of the universe, a new kind of philosopher emerged, one who questioned not just what we know, but how we know. René Descartes and the foundation of certainty. In the 17th century, René Descartes sought to build a foundation for knowledge so solid that it could never be shaken. Disturbed by the uncertainty of his time, he resolved to doubt everything that could possibly be doubted. Perhaps everything we experience, our senses, our memories, even our thoughts, might be illusions. Maybe an evil demon is deceiving us. Maybe the world doesn't exist. But in the midst of this radical doubt, Descartes found one thing he could not doubt: the very act of doubting. If he is being deceived, then he must exist to be deceived. From this, he derived his most famous statement: cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. With this single truth, Descartes began to rebuild knowledge. He proposed that the mind is distinct from the body, a theory known as dualism. The mind is the seat of reason, the one thing we can trust. The body and the material world are secondary, known through the mind's understanding. Descartes' ideas would echo through centuries, shaping both philosophy and science. Empiricism, knowledge through experience. While Descartes emphasized reason, other thinkers focused on experience. This became known as empiricism. John Locke argued that the mind is a tabula rasa, a blank slate. We are born with no innate ideas. All knowledge comes from experience, through our senses and reflection. Locke also introduced ideas about personal identity, linking the self not to a soul or body, but to memory. If you can remember doing something, then you are the same person who did it. But if memory fades, does identity dissolve? George Berkeley took empiricism further. He questioned the very existence of matter, proposing that everything exists only as perceptions in the mind. To be is to be perceived. God, the ultimate perceiver, ensures the continuity of the world. David Hume, perhaps the most radical of the empiricists, challenged the foundations of causality, the self, and even the belief in reason itself. He argued that cause and effect are not logically necessary, but habits of thought. The self, he said, is nothing but a bundle of perceptions, no more permanent than a flame or a river. Hume's skepticism was so profound that it alarmed even him, but it also opened the door to one of the most important thinkers in modern philosophy, Immanuel Kant and the limits of reason. Immanuel Kant sought to resolve the conflict between rationalism and empiricism. He agreed with Hume that experience is essential, but argued that the mind actively shapes that experience. The world we know is not just received, it is constructed. Kant distinguished between the phenomenal world, what we perceive, and the noumenal world, things as they are in themselves, which we can never truly know. He introduced the idea of synthetic a priori knowledge, truths that are both informative and known independently of experience, like the principles of mathematics and morality. Kant's moral philosophy is equally groundbreaking. He believed in a universal moral law, the categorical imperative, which says, Act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. In other words, before you act, ask yourself, what if everyone did this? For Kant, morality is not about consequences or feelings, but about rational duty. We are moral because we are free, rational beings who can choose to act according to reason. Freedom and determinism. Are we truly free? The question of freedom haunted Kant and many others. If the universe operates by fixed laws, are our choices predetermined? If everything has a cause, then aren't our decisions just links in an unbreakable chain? Some philosophers embrace determinism, the view that every event, including human action, is caused by preceding events. Others defended free will, arguing that moral responsibility requires genuine choice. Kant tried to reconcile the two by suggesting that in the phenomenal world we are determined, but in the nominal world, the world of the self as it is, we are free. Later thinkers, like Arthur Schopenhauer, were more pessimistic. He believed that our will is blind and irrational, and that suffering is the essence of life. But even Schopenhauer admired the beauty of art and the power of compassion as temporary escapes from life's misery. The birth of existential questions. By the 19th century, philosophy turned inward again, focusing not just on knowledge or ethics, but on existence itself. What does it mean to be? Philosophers like Søren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche began to explore the human condition in deeply personal terms. Kierkegaard, a devout Christian, spoke of anxiety, despair, and the leap of faith. He argued that truth is subjective and that each person must choose their path with courage and sincerity. Nietzsche, in contrast, declared that God is dead, and with him, the foundation of traditional morality. In place of religious certainty, Nietzsche proposed the will to power, a force of self-overcoming, and the ideal of the Übermensch, the individual who creates their own values in a world without inherent meaning. The problem of meaning. As traditional structures of belief began to crumble, philosophers asked, if the universe has no purpose, can life still have meaning? This question would define much of 20th century existentialism and continues to resonate today. Is meaning something we discover or something we create? Can we live authentically in a world that offers no guarantees? These are not easy questions, but they are essential. They are the questions that stir in the stillness of night, that rise in the silence between thoughts. The questions that remind us we are more than bodies in space. We are beings who wonder, and the wonder continues. Jean-Paul Sartre, Freedom and Responsibility. At the heart of existentialism stands Jean-Paul Sartre, who declared that existence precedes essence. What does this mean? Traditionally, it was thought that we are born with an essence, a purpose or nature given to us by God or biology. But Sartre turned this on its head. We first exist, and only afterward define who we are through our actions. This radical freedom is both liberating and terrifying. We are not determined by fate or nature. We are condemned to be free. With no divine blueprint, every choice becomes a declaration of who we are. But with freedom comes responsibility. We cannot blame our culture, our past, or even our emotions. Every decision, no matter how small, shapes the world. To live authentically, Sartre said, is to embrace this freedom fully. To live in bad faith is to deny it. To pretend we are not free, to hide behind roles or excuses. Simone de Beauvoir and the Ethics of Ambiguity. Simone de Beauvoir, a philosopher in her own right and lifelong partner of Sartre, explored the human condition through the lens of ethics, feminism, and lived experience. In The Second Sex, she exposed how women had been historically constructed as the other, defined in relation to men rather than as full subjects. She declared, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." De Beauvoir argued that the human condition is inherently ambiguous. We are both subjects and objects, free and constrained. Ethical living means navigating this ambiguity with awareness and responsibility, not seeking absolute rules, but respecting freedom in ourselves and others. Albert Camus and the absurd. Albert Camus, often associated with existentialism, though he rejected the label, offered a stark but beautiful vision of human life in the face of the absurd, the confrontation between our longing for meaning and the silent, indifferent universe. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus imagines the tragic figure condemned to roll a boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down forever. But Camus doesn't see this as despair. Instead, he says, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because even in the face of the absurd, we can find freedom. We can rebel, not by escaping or pretending, but by embracing life as it is, without illusions. Camus' philosophy is a quiet defiance. In a world without inherent meaning, we can still choose to live with passion, dignity, and kindness. Phenomenology and the study of experience. Around the same time, a different movement emerged. Phenomenology, the philosophical study of experience itself. Edmund Husserl, its founder, sought to return to the things themselves, stripping away assumptions and examining how objects appear to consciousness. He wanted a philosophy that starts not with abstract theories, but with lived experience. His student, Martin Heidegger, expanded this into an exploration of being. In Being and Time, Heidegger asked what it means to be. He introduced the idea of Dasein, a being who is aware of its own existence and its inevitable death. To live authentically, Heidegger said, is to face our finitude, to recognize that we are beings toward death, and to live in the light of that reality. Later, Maurice Merleau-Ponty emphasized the body as central to experience, not just a vessel, but the very way we are in the world. Through our senses, our movement, our presence, we perceive and construct reality. Language, power, and postmodern questions. As the century progressed, philosophers began to question the very foundations of philosophy itself. Is truth absolute? Can reason escape power? Who controls meaning? Thinkers like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida challenged traditional narratives. Foucault examined how knowledge and power are intertwined, how institutions like prisons, schools, and medicine shape our understanding of truth. Derrida introduced deconstruction, showing how texts undermine their own meanings, how language is slippery, and how binaries, like reason, emotion, or man/woman, often conceal hidden hierarchies. These postmodern thinkers didn't reject truth, but asked, whose truth? For whom? At what cost? And still, the questions remain, from Descartes' certainty to Camus' defiance, from Sartre's freedom to Foucault's critique. One thing is clear: philosophy is not a static body of knowledge, but an ongoing conversation. The questions are as alive today as they were in ancient Athens. What is real? What is good? Who am I? What should I do? And perhaps the deepest question of all, why is there something rather than nothing? As we continue this journey in the next part, we will look at how philosophy intersects with science,
technology, consciousness, and the very fabric of reality itself. The mind, the brain, and the nature of consciousness. In recent centuries, the boundaries between philosophy and science have grown both closer and more complex. Where once philosophy sought the natural causes of reality, now it also asks how we understand those causes, especially through the lens of the human mind. Few questions are more perplexing and more profoundly human than this: what is consciousness? The mind-body problem. The ancient question of the self has evolved into the modern mind-body problem. How can the immaterial world of thoughts, feelings, and experiences emerge from a physical brain made of matter? This puzzle has roots in Descartes' dualism, the idea that mind and body are separate substances. But dualism faces a difficult challenge: interaction. If the mind is immaterial, how does it move the body? How does the physical brain generate consciousness? In response, many modern philosophers and scientists have embraced physicalism, the view that everything, including consciousness, is ultimately physical. But this doesn't settle the matter. If consciousness is just brain activity, why does it feel like something to be you? The hard problem of consciousness. Australian philosopher David Chalmers made this issue famous by distinguishing between the easy problems and the hard problem of consciousness. Easy problems, despite the name, are incredibly complex, but they're tractable. Explaining how the brain processes information, reacts to stimuli, and performs functions. The hard problem, by contrast, asks, why does any of that give rise to experience? Why does seeing red feel like anything at all? Why is there a first-person perspective? This is the mystery of qualia, the raw, subjective qualities of experience. What it's like to taste chocolate, feel sad, or hear a violin. Theories of consciousness. Many theories attempt to explain consciousness. Identity theory. Mental states are identical to brain states. Pain is just neurons firing. Functionalism. What matters is not what the brain is made of, but what it does, like software running on hardware. Panpsychism. Consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, like mass or charge, present even in the tiniest particles. Integrated information theory, IET. Consciousness arises from the integration of information. The more connected and unified the information processing, the more conscious the system. But none of these theories fully explain the subjective nature of experience. Some suggest we may be hitting the limits of what we can know, a philosophical wall. Artificial intelligence and the mind. As technology advances, philosophy finds itself facing new frontiers. Can machines be conscious? Could an artificial intelligence, sufficiently advanced, have thoughts, emotions, or a sense of self? Alan Turing, in the mid-20th century, proposed a test. If a machine can carry on a conversation indistinguishable from a human, should we say it's intelligent? But intelligence is not the same as consciousness. A machine might simulate understanding without truly feeling anything. This is the challenge posed by John Searle's Chinese room thought experiment. If a person in a room can follow rules to manipulate Chinese symbols without understanding them, does the room understand Chinese? The rise of neural networks and generative AI has made this debate even more urgent. As machines write poems, compose music, and pass exams, we must ask, what does it mean to think, to feel, to be? The self. In the age of science, advances in neuroscience challenge our intuitions about the self. Brain scans can predict decisions before we're consciously aware of them. Split-brain patients behave as if they have two minds. Damage to certain regions can alter personality, memory, or even moral judgment. So, is the self an illusion? A story the brain tells itself? Some philosophers, like Daniel Dennett, say yes. The self is a center of narrative gravity, not a thing, but a pattern, like a story or a song. Others, like Thomas Metzinger, argue there is no self, at least not in the way we usually imagine. What we call the self is a model constructed by the brain for survival and coherence. This idea echoes ancient Buddhist philosophy, which taught for centuries that the self is impermanent, empty of essence. Free will and the clockwork brain. Another timeless question collides with modern science. Do we have free will? If our brains follow physical laws, like dominoes falling, are our choices truly free? Determinists say no. Everything is caused. Libertarians say yes. We can choose. Compatibilists offer a middle path. Even if our actions have causes, we are still free when we act according to our desires and values. But neuroscience raises unsettling questions. If brain activity precedes conscious intention, are we just observers of our own actions? Still, many argue that freedom doesn't require randomness. It requires meaning. If your choices arise from who you are, even if you didn't choose to be who you are they not still yours? Meaning, in a scientific world, in a universe governed by laws of physics, where Earth is a pale blue dot in an indifferent cosmos, is there meaning? Some turn to science itself for wonder. Carl Sagan spoke of the cosmos as within us, and of science as a way of finding not just knowledge, but profound awe. Others turn to existentialist ideas. Meaning is not given, but made. Through love, creativity, connection, and courage, we create lives that matter. Philosophy and science may not give us final answers, but they give us better questions. And through those questions, we learn to live more deeply, more mindfully, more fully. The self, identity, and the nature of reason. Who are you? This question has haunted thinkers for centuries, and in the modern age, it's become even more nuanced. We often think of the self as stable, coherent, and singular. But philosophy and psychology have shown that identity is fluid, constructed, and sometimes contradictory. William James, the father of American psychology and philosopher of pragmatism, distinguished between the I and the me. The I is the experiencer, the subject of consciousness. The me is the object, the body, the name, the social roles we identify with. But which is the real self? James proposed that our identity is shaped by how we interact with the world. Our habits, our choices, and the way others see us all contribute to a constantly evolving self. Later, philosophers like Paul Ricoeur and Charles Taylor emphasized that identity is a narrative, a story we tell ourselves about who we are. These stories are shaped by culture, memory, language, and history. But if identity is a story, can it be rewritten? And if we change our story, do we become someone else? Reason, intuition, and the limits of logic. Western philosophy has long privileged reason as the path to truth. From Plato to Descartes to Kant, rationality has been seen as the light that dispels ignorance and chaos. But is reason always reliable? Are there truths beyond logic? Friedrich Nietzsche criticized the blind worship of reason, arguing that instincts, passions, and the will to power drive human life far more than rational calculation. He believed that Western philosophy had lost touch with the richness and tragedy of existence. Blaise Pascal, a 17th century French thinker, famously wrote, "The heart has its reasons, which reason does not know." He believed that faith and intuition were valid forms of understanding, especially when it comes to existential truths. And in the 20th century, philosophers like Ludwig Wittgenstein questioned whether language itself, our primary tool for reasoning, can ever fully capture reality. Whereof one cannot speak, he wrote, thereof one must be silent. Eastern views on the self and mind. While Western thought often emphasizes individuality and rationality, Eastern philosophies offer strikingly different perspectives on the mind and self. In Zen Buddhism, enlightenment does not come through logical reasoning, but through direct experience. Koans, paradoxical riddles like, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" are used to break the grip of rational thought and provoke sudden insight. In Taoism, articulated by Laozi and Zhuangzi, the self is seen not as a fixed entity, but as something that flows with the Tao, the natural, spontaneous way of the universe. Trying to control life through reason is like trying to grasp water with your hands. The Upanishads, ancient Indian texts, suggest that. The deepest self, Atman, is not separate from the cosmos, but identical with Brahman, the infinite. To know oneself fully is to realize one's unity with all existence. Technology and the future of the human mind. Today, questions about the self are no longer just philosophical, they're technological. What happens to identity in a digital world where people construct avatars, curate personas, and engage with algorithms? Are we still ourselves online, or something else entirely? With advances in neurotechnology, brain-computer interfaces, and virtual reality, we're entering a world where the boundary between mind and machine is blurring. Philosophers are already asking, if your consciousness could be uploaded to a computer, would that still be you? If a copy of your mind could live on after your body dies, is that a continuation or a simulation? And in the face of artificial minds, we must ask again, what makes human consciousness unique? Is it emotion, creativity, the awareness of death, or perhaps the most human trait of all is our endless questioning? The mystery of being. As we look deeper into consciousness, identity, and the limits of reason, we come full circle to the mystery of being itself. Martin Heidegger reminded us that we take existence for granted. We ask about this or that, but not about the most basic fact, that things are at all. Heidegger called us to awaken from our forgetfulness of being, not to solve the mystery, but to dwell within it, to live with openness and awe. Similarly, the mystics of many traditions speak not of explaining the world, but of experiencing it directly through silence, meditation, love, or surrender. In this light, philosophy is not just analysis, but a way of life, a path of presence, wonder, and care. Philosophy as practice. In the modern world, philosophy is often seen as abstract, academic, or purely theoretical. But for much of history, and in many traditions, it has been a practice, a way of living. The Stoics saw philosophy as preparation for life's challenges. Marcus Aurelius, ruling Rome, wrote his meditations not for others, but for himself, as reminders to stay calm, just, and rational. The Epicureans created communities centered on simple living and the pursuit of inner peace. The Cynics practiced radical freedom, rejecting material wealth to live in harmony with nature. In the East, the yogic and Buddhist paths are deeply philosophical. They explore the mind not through books, but through direct experience, meditation, breath, self-inquiry. These are philosophies of attention, compassion, and liberation. Even today, millions turn to these traditions not for intellectual stimulation, but for healing, guidance, and wisdom. Mindfulness and the return to presence. A quiet revolution is happening in contemporary life, the return of mindfulness. Rooted in Buddhist practice, Mindfulness is now studied scientifically and applied in therapy, education, and even business. At its core, it asks a deceptively simple question: can you be present right now? Philosophers like John Kabat-Zinn, Thich Nhat Hanh, and Sam Harris have helped bridge ancient meditation with modern life. They remind us that awareness is not just a mental state, it is a doorway to peace. Mindfulness echoes many philosophical teachings: the Stoic practice of observing thoughts without judgment, the existential call to authenticity, the Taoist embrace of flow, all ask us to slow down, to pay attention, to live, not in abstraction, but in the pulse of the present moment. Philosophy in the everyday. We often think of philosophy as distant from daily life, but in truth, every decision is philosophical. When you choose kindness over cruelty, when you speak the truth or remain silent, when you question your beliefs or stay with certainty, you are living philosophy. The questions never really go away. What matters most? Who do I want to become? What is a good life? These are not just ideas, they are the fabric of your being, and the answers are not fixed. They evolve as you grow, stumble, reflect, and return again, bridging ancient and modern wisdom. As we've seen, philosophical traditions from every part of the world have asked the same essential questions. Whether through Plato or Confucius, Rumi or Kant, Simone Weil or Laozi, the inquiries remain. What is real? Who am I? How should I live? Today, we have the gift and the challenge of synthesizing these voices. No longer bound by geography or time, we can weave together insights from West and East, logic and intuition, reason and mysticism. We can read Descartes in the morning and practice mindfulness in the afternoon. We can blend Aristotle's virtue ethics with Zen's radical presence. We can think with our minds, feel with our hearts, and act with our whole selves. This is the frontier of philosophy today. Not new systems, but new integrations. Not just knowledge, but wisdom, a quiet ending, and a new beginning. And so, we arrive at a quiet place. A place not of answers, but of openness. Perhaps the greatest gift of philosophy is not certainty, but humility. Not control, but wonder. To be alive is to not know. To be human is to seek. In the dark, in the silence, in the stillness of a question unanswered, there is something beautiful, something sacred. You don't need to understand everything. You don't need to solve life. You just need to be here, breathing, aware, awake to the mystery. And perhaps, in that gentle space, truth is already whispering. Justice, power, and the shape of society. The question of how individuals ought to live naturally leads to the larger, equally vital question of how we ought to live together. From the earliest city-states of Mesopotamia to the bustling democracies and authoritarian regimes of the present, philosophy has been intimately entangled with politics. What is justice? Who should rule? What gives authority its legitimacy? These questions echo through time, not as mere academic concerns, but as living matters that shape how societies form, function, and fail. In ancient Greece, political philosophy begins with Plato and Aristotle, two thinkers whose views diverge sharply, yet together lay the foundation of Western political thought. Plato, writing in the wake of Socrates' execution by Athenian democracy, became deeply skeptical of popular rule. In the Republic, he envisioned an ideal state ruled not by the many, but by the wise, philosopher kings who governed not for wealth or power, but for the good of all. Justice, in Plato's view, meant harmony, a society where each class performed its proper role, rulers with wisdom, soldiers with courage, and workers with moderation. Each part of the soul mirrored this structure, and a just society was one that nurtured the soul's balance. Yet while Plato dreamed of unity and order, Aristotle approached politics with a more empirical, grounded sensibility. In his Politics, Aristotle studied real city-states, analyzing their constitutions and arguing that man is a political animal, naturally inclined to live in community. For Aristotle, justice was not a perfect ideal, but a practical balance, achieved when laws promoted virtue and the common good. Unlike Plato, he favored a constitutional government where the middle class tempered extremes of wealth and poverty. Centuries later, amid the chaos of collapsing empires and feudal kingdoms, political philosophy took a darker turn. Thomas Hobbes, writing in the shadow of civil war in 17th century England, painted a grim picture of human nature. In his seminal work, Leviathan, Hobbes described the state of nature, a hypothetical world without government, as a place of constant fear, where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. To escape this anarchy, people must surrender some freedom to a sovereign authority, a Leviathan, with absolute power to ensure peace. Hobbes's vision was stark, but not without logic. Order is the precondition of liberty. Without it, there is only violence. In contrast, John Locke offered a more optimistic account. He believed in natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and argued that governments exist only to protect these rights. If they fail to do so, the people have the right to revolt. Locke's ideas would go on to inspire the Enlightenment, the American Revolution, and the very concept of liberal democracy. The Enlightenment, an intellectual revolution spanning the 17th and 18th centuries, brought with it new visions of politics, freedom, and human progress. Philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Montesquieu questioned the foundations of monarchy and aristocracy. Rousseau, in particular, posed a radical idea that civilization corrupts, not improves, humanity. In his work, The Social Contract, Rousseau claimed that true freedom is found in obedience to a general will, a collective agreement to pursue the common good. Unlike Hobbes, who saw authority as a restraint on chaos, Rousseau believed legitimate government arises from shared moral commitment. Freedom, in this view, is not simply doing as one pleases, but living in a way that benefits all. Yet Rousseau also warned of inequality, which he saw as the true source of suffering and injustice. His call for equality and direct democracy would inspire revolutions, but also in twisted forms, authoritarian regimes that claim to act on behalf of the people. As the modern world unfolded, with its sprawling cities, industrial economies, and nation-states, new questions arose. How does power operate within systems, not just individuals? Who controls the means of production, and how does that shape society? These were the questions that Karl Marx sought to answer. Rejecting the Enlightenment faith in individual rights as bourgeois illusions, Marx focused on material conditions, how economic structures determine political life. In his analysis, history is a struggle between classes, oppressors and oppressed, capitalists and workers. The state, he argued, serves the interests of the ruling class. True liberation can only come through revolution, when the workers seize control of the means of production and create a classless society. Though the implementation of Marx's ideas in the 20th century often led to repression and tyranny, his critique of capitalism continues to influence debates on inequality, labor, and economic justice. Yet political philosophy did not stop at revolution. In the 20th century, as democracy became the dominant model in many parts of the world, thinkers began to refine what democracy truly means. Is it merely majority rule, or does it require a deeper commitment to rights, deliberation, and pluralism? John Rawls, one of the most influential political philosophers of the modern era, proposed a vision of justice as fairness. In his theory of justice, Rawls imagined a thought experiment, the original position, where individuals, behind a veil of ignorance, design the rules of society without knowing their future status. Rawls argued that rational people, unaware of whether they'd be rich or poor, healthy or sick, would choose principles that benefit the least advantaged. This thought experiment reframed justice not as charity or balance, but as a moral imperative rooted in impartiality. Rawls' work influenced everything from welfare policy to constitutional law, suggesting that fairness, properly understood, can be a guiding principle even in complex pluralistic societies. Other thinkers, like Hannah Arendt, focused on power not just as a force, but as a relationship, one shaped by action, speech, and the public realm. For Arendt, totalitarianism was not an accident, but a symptom of modern loneliness and alienation. Her warning was clear. When people withdraw from public life, when they cease to care or participate, they become vulnerable to authoritarianism. True political freedom, she believed, arises not from the private sphere of comfort, but from the shared space of action, where we appear before others and create a world together. Her insights remain deeply relevant in an age of digital isolation and political polarization. As we step back from these complex visions, a deeper question emerges. Is justice even possible? Is it a real structure we can build, or an ideal we can only approximate? Philosophers from Socrates to Martin Luther King Jr. have argued that justice begins not with systems, but with conscience. With a refusal to accept what is merely legal or traditional if it contradicts what is right. In King's letter from Birmingham jail, he draws from Augustine and Aquinas, insisting that unjust laws are no laws at all. His vision, rooted in faith, reason, and resistance, reminds us that justice is not static. It is a flame we must protect, kindle, and sometimes reignite, even when the world grows cold. And so, the political remains deeply philosophical. For politics is not just policy, it is ethics in motion, justice in action, the soul of a society revealed in how it treats its weakest members. Philosophy helps us see what lies beneath the slogans and systems. It calls us to question not just who should lead, but how we should live together, with dignity, equity, and care. As we reflect further on justice and political order, another question surfaces, one both ancient and urgently modern. What is freedom? Is it the absence of restraint or something deeper, the ability to live with purpose and dignity? The idea of freedom has evolved throughout history, shaped by shifting views of the self, society, and the state. For the ancients, freedom often meant participation. In Athenian democracy, a citizen was free not because he could do as he pleased, but because he had a voice in collective decisions. In the Roman Republic, liberty was protected by the law and the balance of powers. But in the modern world, especially after the Enlightenment, freedom became more associated with the individual, his conscience, his rights, and his sovereignty over his own life. Isaiah Berlin, a 20th century British philosopher, articulated two competing visions of liberty: negative liberty and positive liberty. Negative liberty is freedom from interference, the right to be left alone. It is the bedrock of liberal democracies, where laws protect individuals from coercion. Positive liberty, by contrast, is the freedom to fulfill one's potential, to act according to reason, not just impulse. But Berlin warned that positive liberty, though noble, can be twisted. When states claim to know what's best for their citizens, they may restrict freedom in the name of enlightenment. Thus, the tension. How do we empower people without controlling them? This tension is nowhere clearer than in the question of obedience. At what point does following the law become immoral? What should we do when authority demands what our conscience forbids? These are the dilemmas explored by Henry David Thoreau in his essay, Civil Disobedience. In the mid-19th century, Thoreau refused to pay taxes to a government that supported slavery and war. He was jailed briefly, but remained defiant. "The only obligation," he wrote, "which I have a right to assume is to do at any time what I think right." For Thoreau, justice lay not in institutions, but in personal integrity. His quiet rebellion inspired generations, from Gandhi to Martin Luther King Jr., to resist unjust systems through peaceful moral defiance. Indeed, civil disobedience has become one of the most powerful tools for confronting injustice. Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha, truth force, blended Indian spiritual tradition with political resistance. It held that true power lies in the refusal to harm, in the stubborn insistence on dignity, even under oppression. Martin Luther King Jr. carried this torch in the American Civil Rights Movement, blending Christian love, democratic ideals, and philosophical rigor. In his letter from Birmingham jail, he distinguishes between just and unjust laws. A just law uplifts the human personality. An unjust law degrades it. And the moral duty, King insists, is to break unjust laws openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. Yet civil disobedience is not without complexity. It asks us to judge the law by a higher standard. But whose standard? What if different people disagree about what is just? In pluralistic societies, where values clash, the challenge is not just to resist evil, but to find common ground without losing one's soul. This leads us to the heart of democracy, not just as a system of voting, but as a moral culture. Democracy requires not only rights, but virtues: patience, humility, courage, and the ability to listen. It asks us to live with disagreement, to see our adversaries not as enemies, but as fellow citizens. The philosopher John Dewey described democracy as a way of life, an ongoing experiment in cooperation, grounded in the belief that people, when given the chance, can govern themselves wisely. But even in democracies, power concentrates. Corporations influence policy. Media shapes perception. Fear drives division. In this environment, the philosopher's voice grows more essential, not to offer easy answers, but to slow us down, to ask, what kind of people are we becoming? What kind of world are we building? In this reflective space, we see that freedom is more than autonomy. It is the ability to live meaningfully with others. And justice is not only a structure, it is a relationship between ruler and ruled, between self and neighbor, between what is and what ought to be. Hidden power, cultural forces, and the fragile balance of unity. As political thought evolved in the 20th century, philosophers began to look beyond formal institutions and laws to examine the subtler forces that shape power. While classical theories emphasized who holds authority and how it is used, a newer line of inquiry asked, how is power created and maintained invisibly? Michel Foucault, one of the most influential thinkers of the last century, offered a profound rethinking of how societies govern not just bodies, but minds. To Foucault, power is not confined to kings or parliaments. It circulates through every layer of society, embedded in schools, hospitals, prisons, and even in the way we speak. It works not only through punishment, but through normalization, defining what is healthy, sane, acceptable. Power, in this sense, is productive. It creates categories, identities, and truths. Foucault's studies of institutions revealed how knowledge and power intertwine. The panopticon, a prison design where inmates can never be sure if they're being watched, becomes a metaphor for modern society. We internalize surveillance. We police ourselves. The philosopher's role, then, is not to dictate what is right, but to uncover the systems that shape our perceptions. To ask, who decides what is normal? Who benefits from our silence? This line of questioning doesn't offer clear-cut solutions, but it opens space for resistance, for alternative ways of being, for voices once silenced. These insights deepen when we turn to cultural philosophy, where thinkers like Antonio Gramsci explored the concept of hegemony, not just rule by force, but rule by consent. Through media, education, and tradition, dominant groups create a common sense that seems natural but is historically constructed. The most effective power, Gramsci argued, is the kind we don't notice. It persuades rather than compels. It shapes our dreams, our fears, our sense of what is possible. Thus, real political change requires not just new laws, but new ways of thinking, new myths, new language, new narratives. Language itself becomes a battlefield. Jacques Derrida and other postmodern thinkers argue that meaning is never fixed. Words carry histories, connotations, and ambiguities. What we call truth is often a product of framing, omission, and repetition. This is not to say that nothing is real, but that reality is always filtered. That to speak is to shape, and to question language is to begin freeing ourselves from inherited constraints. In light of these revelations, the individual's role becomes both more fragile and more potent. We are shaped by forces larger than ourselves, yet we still bear responsibility. Every action, every word, contributes to the culture we inhabit. The personal is political, not in the sense that everything must become activism, but that every life reflects and refracts the structures it touches. To love freely, to think deeply, to care without conformity, these become acts of quiet rebellion, and so the vision of political philosophy matures. It no longer imagines perfect blueprints or utopias. It becomes instead a compass, a way of orienting ourselves within complexity, contradiction, and impermanence. It asks not only who should rule, but how we should relate to power, to others, to ourselves. In the end, the greatest political question may not be how to govern others, but how to live with them, with decency, awareness, and grace. The challenge is not merely to survive together, but to thrive, without domination, without fear, without losing what makes us human. Political philosophy does not end with critiques or reforms. It reaches toward the horizon, toward utopia. The term, coined by Thomas More in the 16th century, literally means no place, and yet it has fueled some of humanity's deepest hopes. A world without hunger, war, or suffering. A society where all live in harmony. These dreams have animated religious visions, socialist manifestos, and countless philosophical texts. But what is a utopia really? Is it a blueprint, a moral compass, or a mirror showing us what we lack? In More's original utopia, we encounter an island where property is communal, work is shared, and reason guides decision-making. There is order, peace, and leisure, but also control, uniformity, and surveillance. Even in its idealism, the text contains ambiguity. Utopias often promise equality, but at what cost? Individuality, spontaneity, dissent. The Enlightenment furthered the utopian impulse. Thinkers like Condorcet and Saint-Simon envisioned rational societies governed by science and virtue. But the 20th century saw a sobering backlash, as the very tools meant to uplift humanity, reason, technology, central planning, were used to justify mass control, genocide, and totalitarianism. This is where dystopia enters, not merely as fiction, but as philosophy. George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World are not just stories, they are warnings. Orwell shows a world where truth is erased, language is weaponized, and surveillance crushes rebellion. Huxley envisions a society where freedom is lost, not through fear, but pleasure, where people are pacified by entertainment, distraction, and engineered happiness. Both ask, what happens when utopia becomes tyranny? Yet even dystopia holds a strange hope. It testifies that freedom matters, that conscience persists, that truth can survive erasure. These works challenge us not to abandon the dream of a better world, but to pursue it with humility, vigilance, and care. Philosophers like Ernst Bloch revived utopian thinking in the 20th century, but not as fixed plans. For Bloch, utopia is a principle of hope, a longing that lives in art, myth, and imagination. It is not a destination, but a horizon that guides us. To dream of utopia is to say, the world as it is not enough. But how do we build such a world? Through revolution or reform? Through policy or love? The answers differ. Some, like anarchist Emma Goldman, envisioned a society beyond hierarchy altogether, a world where mutual aid replaces coercion. Others, like Martin Buber, sought dialogue, real, respectful, face-to-face relations, as the foundation of community. Buber's philosophy of the I-thou relationship invites us to see others not as means, but as sacred ends. In recent years, political philosophy has grappled with global crises, climate change, mass migration, digital manipulation, and systemic injustice. These challenges reveal the limits of older frameworks. Rights and duties must now be understood across borders, generations, and even species. Environmental ethics, post-colonial theory, and indigenous philosophies all ask us to rethink what justice looks like, not just for humans, but for the earth itself. This expansion of moral concern echoes ancient wisdom. The Stoics saw all people as citizens of the cosmos. Indigenous traditions speak of harmony with nature, stewardship over dominion. In these teachings, justice is not control, it is balance, not ownership, but relationship. And yet, for all our progress, suffering persists. War, poverty, racism, oppression, these are not relics, but realities. Philosophy does not erase them, but it gives us tools to name what is wrong, to imagine what could be right, to act where we are. So what is the end of political philosophy? Not utopia, perhaps, but orientation. A way to move through history with eyes open, heart attuned, and conscience awake. To question power, to defend the vulnerable, to build, even in fragments, a world that is more just than the one we inherited. Ethics is perhaps the most intimate branch of philosophy. It does not ask what the world is made of, or how we know what we know, but rather, what should I do? In this question lies our daily struggle. Whether in grand dilemmas or ordinary choices, we are always trying, consciously or not, to do what feels right. to be a good friend, a decent partner, an honest worker, a kind stranger. And yet the answers to what is right are rarely simple. They change with context, with culture, with conscience. Philosophy gives us a space to think about these questions deeply, not just to follow rules, but to understand the values behind them. One of the earliest ethical theories in Western thought is virtue ethics, most famously articulated by Aristotle. For Aristotle, ethics is not about following commandments or calculating outcomes. It is about becoming the kind of person who habitually chooses well. A good life, he argued, is one that fulfills our nature, which for humans means living in accordance with reason and cultivating virtue, traits like courage, generosity, and temperance. But virtue, for Aristotle, lies in the mean, the balance between extremes. Courage is the mean between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity lies between stinginess and wastefulness. Ethics, then, is not about rules, but practice. We become just by doing just acts. We build character slowly, like a craft. The goal is eudaimonia, a state of flourishing or deep fulfillment, a life that is not just lived, but lived well. Centuries later, the ethical landscape shifted with the rise of deontology and utilitarianism, two theories that continue to shape modern moral thought. Immanuel Kant, the great deontologist, believed that morality is rooted in duty. We should not act based on consequences, but on principle. The only truly good thing, Kant said, is a good will, acting out of respect for the moral law. He gave us the categorical imperative, a universal test for ethical action. Act only according to that rule you could will to be a universal law. In other words, if you wouldn't want everyone to lie, you must not lie. Kant's ethics are demanding but clear. They appeal to our sense of consistency, dignity, and rationality. By contrast, utilitarianism, developed by Jeremy Bentham and later refined by John Stuart Mill, focuses squarely on consequences. The right action, according to this view, is the one that maximizes happiness for the greatest number of people. Pleasure and pain become the currency of morality. This approach is pragmatic, even democratic. It weighs outcomes and aims for collective well-being. But it also faces hard questions. Can the happiness of the many justify the suffering of the few? What about justice, or rights, or love? Things that cannot always be. Measured? Each of these theories offers insight, but also reveals limits. And in that space of tension, between principle and outcome, between virtue and duty, we find the ethical life itself. It is not a formula, but a journey, an unfolding. In more recent times, philosophers have turned their attention to voices once ignored. Feminist ethics, for instance, challenges the traditional emphasis on autonomy and reason, highlighting instead the moral importance of relationships, care, and emotional intelligence. Thinkers like Carol Gilligan and Nell Noddings argue that ethics should not only be about justice and rules, but about care, about how we attend to others in vulnerability, in dependence, in trust. The ethics of care reminds us that life is sustained not by logic alone, but by the quiet labor of love, parenting, nursing, listening, comforting. Similarly, existentialist ethics focuses not on what is universally right, but on what it means to live authentically. Soren Kierkegaard, Simone de Beauvoir, and Jean-Paul Sartre each stress the freedom and responsibility of individuals to define their own values, to act sincerely, to bear the weight of moral choice in a world without guarantees. This vision of ethics is not about obedience, but integrity. Not about answers, but about courage in the face of uncertainty. And then there is compassion, the quiet, often overlooked force that flows beneath all moral traditions. In Buddhist philosophy, compassion is not a virtue among others. It is the heart of awakening, to suffer with others, to relieve pain, to meet the world with gentleness. The Dalai Lama teaches that if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. It is the simplest ethic and the hardest. Not because it is complex, but because it demands the softening of ego, the letting go of control. Ethics, then, is not about being perfect. It is about being present, being willing, being awake to the needs of the moment. It is the courage to be kind, even when no one is watching, the choice to tell the truth, even when it costs, the patience to forgive, the humility to learn, the strength to act. And always, the question remains, how should I live? Philosophy cannot answer it once and for all, but it invites us to ask it again and again, not as a burden, but as a blessing. For in asking, we become more than we were. We become moral beings, not flawless but striving, not finished but beginning. As we move deeper into the study of ethics, we find ourselves not in clarity, but in the shadows of difficult decisions, those grey areas where right and wrong are not cleanly divided, where every choice carries a cost. These are not abstract puzzles. They are the stuff of real life. The friend who asks you to keep a secret, the stranger in need when you're late for work, the temptation to lie just this once to spare someone pain. These moments do not fit neatly into categories. They demand presence, judgment, and often courage. Philosophers have long explored these moral dilemmas to stretch our understanding. Consider the classic trolley problem. A runaway train is headed toward 5 people. You can pull a lever to divert it to another track, where it will kill only one. What do? Utilitarianism would suggest pulling the lever. Saving more lives is the greater good. But deontologists may argue that actively redirecting the train makes you morally responsible for a death that would not have happened otherwise. The dilemma does not ask for a correct answer, but invites reflection. What matters more, intentions or consequences? Is there a moral difference between action and inaction? Such thought experiments are not just intellectual games. They echo in hospitals, in war zones, in public policy. Should a doctor save 5 patients by harvesting the organs of 1 healthy person? Should governments sacrifice privacy for security? Should we lie to protect someone from a harsh truth? Each question tests the boundaries of our values, revealing that ethics is often not about choosing good over evil, but about navigating competing goods and inevitable harms. In this space of ambiguity, some philosophers turn to contextual ethics, recognizing that universal rules cannot always guide particular lives. What is right for one person in one culture may not be right for another. Yet this flexibility invites new questions. If morality is relative, can we ever condemn cruelty? Can anything be truly wrong? To answer this, we must revisit the role of empathy, the capacity to feel with others, to imagine their suffering as our own. Moral philosopher Martha Nussbaum emphasizes the power of storytelling and imagination in cultivating empathy. Literature, she argues, is not just art, it is moral education. Through fiction, we enter lives not our own. We see the world through eyes shaped by different histories, fears, and loves. In doing so, we soften, we grow. This moral imagination is essential in a globalized world, where our actions ripple across oceans and generations. Buying a shirt can support or exploit. Eating a meal may nourish or destroy ecosystems. Ethical living today requires awareness not just of our neighbors, but of systems, economic, ecological, social, that link us to strangers near and far. And yet, awareness is not enough. ethics calls for action, but what kind? Some choose protest, others quiet reform. Some work within institutions, others break away. There is no one path, but all paths require reflection, intention, and a willingness to bear the weight of choice. In these moments, conscience becomes our compass. Conscience is not the voice of society or religion, it is the voice within. Sometimes it aligns with the crowd, often it does not. Socrates followed his conscience even unto death, choosing integrity over obedience. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a theologian in Nazi Germany, wrestled with the ethics of assassination. Could he kill one man to save many? His writings do not offer comfort, but something deeper: witness, a record of moral struggle in a dark time. Such examples remind us that ethics is not for the comfortable. It is forged in conflict, in the tension between the world as it is and the world as it ought to be. But this tension is also sacred. It means we care. It means we are not numb. To live ethically, then, is not to have all the answers. It is to be awake, to listen, to act, not perfectly, but sincerely, to say yes when it is easier to look away, to say no when silence feels safer. In the heart of ethics lies not only justice or duty, but something softer, more mysterious: forgiveness. It is one of the most difficult acts a human being can perform. To forgive is to release someone from the debt they owe, not because they deserve it, but because we choose to. It is a gift, not a transaction. And yet, it is also a kind of power, the power to interrupt cycles of resentment, to end stories of pain before they consume us. Philosophers and theologians alike have wrestled with the meaning of forgiveness. In Christian thought, forgiveness is central, a divine grace, but also a moral duty. Forgive them, for they know not what they do, Christ says on the cross, offering pardon even to those who cause him death. But not all traditions treat forgiveness as unconditional. In Jewish ethics, for example, forgiveness must be preceded by repentance, by a turning of the heart. It is a sacred process, not a shortcut to reconciliation. The philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote that forgiveness is the only way to undo the irreversibility of the past. Once an act is done, it cannot be undone, but it can be transcended. Forgiveness allows the world to begin again. Without it, she argued, human community would be impossible, for we are all fallible. We all injure and are injured. If justice is the structure of ethical life, then forgiveness is its healing. Yet forgiveness is not always possible, and it is never simple. It does not mean forgetting. It does not require reconciliation. It may take years or never come at all. But even the longing to forgive, even the effort to hold both justice and mercy in the same heart, is a moral act. Beyond forgiveness lies the wider horizon of moral growth, the slow, invisible labor of becoming. We often think of ethics as a set of answers, a guidebook, but in truth, it is more like a garden, requiring cultivation, patience, and constant return. We do not become ethical once and for all. We begin again every morning, in every conversation, in every small decision. And this is perhaps the most hopeful truth in all of philosophy, that no matter who we have been, we are never finished. We can change. Thinkers like Confucius emphasize this daily path. The Junzi, or noble person, is not born but made through ritual, humility, reflection, and care. Ethics is not imposed from above, but woven into life. The way you speak, the way you serve tea, the way you pause before responding. Each gesture carries moral weight. In modern psychology, too, we see that character is malleable. Empathy can be trained. Bias can be unlearned. Habits of honesty, compassion, and resilience can be built, brick by brick. But change takes intention. It asks that we look inward, not in judgment, but with curiosity. Who am I becoming? What values am I enacting with my time, my attention, my presence? The ethical life is, in this sense, not a destination, but a practice. It is not about being perfect, but being open to discomfort, to contradiction, to others. It is about choosing, again and again, to care, to notice, to respond. It is about remembering that every interaction is a chance to be kind or cruel, to build trust or break it, to honor life or ignore it. And perhaps, at the deepest level, ethics is not even about right and wrong. It is about love, not sentimental love, but the fierce, enduring love that sees the dignity in others, even when they fall short, even when we do. The love that says, you matter, and so do I, and so does this moment. With this, we close our reflection on ethics, not with certainty, but with humility. The world will always challenge us, but we are not powerless. We can listen, we can learn, we can try. And in trying, we keep philosophy alive, not in books, but in breath. Long before humanity recorded laws or codified ethics, we painted on cave walls. We shaped clay into forms, sang songs beneath the stars, and danced stories into being. The aesthetic impulse, our longing for beauty, harmony, expression, is one of the oldest dimensions of the human spirit. But what is beauty? Why does it move us? Is it merely pleasure or something deeper, something sacred? Plato, ever the dualist, believed that beauty was not merely in objects, but in the world of forms. True beauty, he said, was eternal and perfect, only dimly reflected in the physical world. When we admire a beautiful face or a work of art, we are, in truth, glimpsing something beyond, an ideal. In his Symposium, Plato describes a ladder of love, beginning with physical attraction, but rising toward the beauty of minds, laws, and finally, beauty itself, which is pure, eternal, and unchanging. Beauty, for Plato, is not just about pleasure, it is about truth. Aristotle, more grounded, saw art as imitation, mimesis, but not in a derogatory way. Art, he argued, reflects life and helps us understand it. In poetics, he analyzed tragedy not as mere entertainment, but as catharsis, a cleansing of emotion. By watching a play, we confront fear and pity and emerge somehow renewed. Art reveals the universal in the particular. A single character, a single line of poetry can illuminate all of human nature. Centuries later, beauty became central to Christian philosophy. Thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas saw beauty as divine order, a reflection of God's creation. The symmetry of a flower, the harmony of music, the light in a painting, these were all glimpses of a transcendent reality. To create art was to honor the divine. But art also posed dangers: vanity, idolatry, sensuality. The church praised the beauty that uplifted, but feared the beauty that seduced. As the Renaissance blossomed, so too did the philosophy of art. Artists became thinkers. Art became inquiry. Leonardo da Vinci blended anatomy with painting, science with sculpture. Michelangelo carved souls into marble. Beauty was not passive, it was an act of mastery, of intellect, of insight. The Enlightenment brought a new turn. Immanuel Kant, in his Critique of Judgment, proposed that beauty is not a property of objects, but a subjective response. When we call something beautiful, we are not describing it. We're expressing a kind of universal delight. And yet, Kant argued, this pleasure is disinterested. It asks for nothing. We admire beauty not because it serves us, but because it lifts us out of ourselves. In beauty, we experience harmony between imagination and understanding. We feel at home in the world. But what of the ugly, the strange, the disturbing? Romanticism in the 19th century expanded aesthetics to include the sublime, the vast, the terrifying, the awe-inspiring. A storm at sea, a dark mountain, a tragic symphony. All these awaken not comfort, but awe. Edmund Burke and later philosophers describe the sublime as a kind of beautiful terror. It reminds us of our smallness, but also our capacity to feel beyond reason. In the modern era, art broke free from rules altogether. The rise of abstract painting, surrealism, minimalism, performance art, each movement challenged what art could be. Duchamp placed a urinal in a gallery and called it fountain. Was it beautiful? No. But was it art? Perhaps. Art now became a question, not a statement. Its role was not just to please, but to provoke. Philosophers like Arthur Danto and Susan Sontag wrestled with this shift. Danto declared that art had reached an end, not a death, but a transformation. It was no longer about form, but about meaning. Anything could be art if it invited reflection. Sontag, in contrast, called for a return to sensuality, an erotics of art. She reminded us that too much interpretation can strangle the life out of beauty. Sometimes, a painting should just be seen, a poem felt, a song heard. Aesthetic experience is unique in its intimacy. We do not consume art as we consume food or facts. We encounter it. We surrender. A painting hangs quietly, and yet it moves us. A line of music opens a memory. A dancer's gesture tells us something we didn't know we knew. In these moments, we feel more alive, not because art explains life, but because it expresses it. But beauty is not only in galleries or concert halls. It lives in nature, in light, in human connection. A child's laughter, the way wind moves through leaves, the quiet symmetry of kindness. These are aesthetic experiences too, not grand, but profound. They remind us that beauty is not always crafted. Sometimes it simply is. And in that recognition, we are changed. We become less numb, more aware, more tender. Beauty softens us. It asks us to pause, to look again, to listen. In a noisy, efficient world, this is a kind of resistance. To stop, to wonder, to admire. It is a practice of attention, and in attention, there is love. So, aesthetics is not a luxury, it is a necessity, a way of remembering what makes life worth living, a way of seeing the sacred in the everyday. As we linger in the realm of aesthetics, a deeper question arises. What does beauty do to us? It is not merely something to be appreciated. It is something that reaches into us, often without asking permission, and changes the way we see. Sometimes, beauty softens the heart. Other times, it unsettles,
challenges, confronts. Beauty can be comfort or revolution, or both at once. Consider how beauty and identity are intertwined. What we call beautiful often reflects who we are, or who we long to be. But this relationship is not always innocent. Cultural ideals of beauty, shaped by media, tradition, and power, can become prisons. Certain bodies, faces, colors, or styles are elevated, while others are erased. The philosopher Bell Hooks spoke of this injustice, calling for an aesthetic of inclusion, one that celebrates difference, honors the overlooked, and questions the forces that dictate taste. In this way, aesthetics becomes political, not in the sense of propaganda, but in the quiet revolution of seeing anew. Who gets to be seen? Whose stories are told? What counts as art? These are not only aesthetic questions, they are moral ones. For to exclude someone from the realm of beauty is to suggest they do not belong in the fullness of humanity. And yet, art also has the power to heal these fractures, to make visible what was hidden, to restore dignity. In the work of Frida Kahlo, we see pain made vivid, personal suffering turned into color and form. In James Baldwin's essays, language becomes a flame, burning through falsehood to expose a more honest beauty, one rooted in truth, struggle, and tenderness. The philosopher Elaine Scarry once wrote that beauty quickens us, that it wakes us up to the presence of others. When we find something beautiful, we are pulled out of ourselves. We look, we listen, we care. This is why beauty is not trivial. It is a training ground for ethics. To see something as beautiful is to see it as worthy of attention, of preservation, of love. And this habit of seeing can extend slowly, imperfectly, to people, to places, to the planet itself. This connection between beauty and care is at the heart of many spiritual traditions. In Zen Buddhism, even the most ordinary acts, sweeping a floor, arranging flowers, drinking tea, are aesthetic experiences. The attention given to form, space, and silence is not for decoration. It is for presence. Beauty becomes a form of mindfulness, of reverence, of belonging. Similarly, in Islamic art, beauty is a way of honoring the divine. The intricate patterns of a mosque, the rhythmic calligraphy of the Quran, the geometry of tiles, all speak not of ego, but of surrender. The artist dissolves into the work, and in doing so, makes visible the invisible. What unites these traditions is not a single definition of beauty, but a shared belief that beauty is a path, not to escape the world, but to enter it more fully, to see it not as random or crude, but as alive with meaning. And so, aesthetics is not just a matter of style, it is a philosophy of how to be in the world. It teaches us to look closely, to value nuance, to embrace mystery. It reminds us that life is not only about answers, but about wonder, to live.
Aesthetically is not to live extravagantly, it is to live attentively, to find harmony in the midst of chaos, to let light fall just right on the face of the ordinary. Time is the canvas upon which all life unfolds, and yet it remains one of the most mysterious dimensions of our experience. We live in time, but cannot touch it. We measure it, yet cannot control it. We speak of the past and the future, yet exist only in the now. What then is time? St. Augustine famously said, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know what it is. If I try to explain it, I do not." His confession captures the paradox perfectly. Time structures our days, clocks, calendars, schedules, but eludes every effort to define it, To some philosophers, time is objective, a flowing river, independent of our awareness. To others, it is subjective, a construction of the mind, inseparable from consciousness. The ancient Greeks wrestled with this too. Heraclitus believed in perpetual change. Everything flows, nothing stands still. For him, time was movement, transformation, the constant becoming of the universe. In contrast, Parmenides denied time's reality. For him, change was illusion. Only being truly is. Their tension echoes across centuries, a debate between motion and stillness, between flux and permanence. Modern thinkers offered new frameworks. Immanuel Kant argued that time and space are not properties of the world, but structures of our perception. We do not observe time, we bring it with us. Albert Einstein, from the realm of physics, shattered the idea of universal time. In relativity, time is flexible, dependent on motion and gravity. There is no single now. Time, it seems, is stranger than intuition allows. But for most of us, time is not theoretical. It is emotional. We feel it in the ache of nostalgia, in the anxiety of deadlines, in the grief of endings. Time gives shape to longing, to memory, to hope. It is the measure of our lives and the shadow of our mortality. To be human is to know that we will die. This knowledge, as terrifying as it may be, also gives life its urgency and its beauty. Without death, there is no meaning. Every sunset, every goodbye, every act of love carries weight because it is fleeting. The ancient Stoics embraced this truth. Memento mori, remember you will die, not to despair, but to live more fully, to love without delay, to forgive without waiting, to speak what matters now. Existentialist philosophers confronted mortality directly. For Martin Heidegger, we are not just beings in time, we are beings toward death. Our finitude is not a flaw, it is what gives authenticity to our choices. Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus pushed further. In a world without guaranteed meaning, we are free and therefore responsible for creating it ourselves. Camus, in particular, gave us the powerful image of Sisyphus, condemned to roll a stone up a hill for eternity. But Camus does not pity him. He imagines Sisyphus happy. Why? Because in embracing the absurd, in defying despair, he claims his freedom. Life may be without final answers, but it is not without value. We create value, moment by moment, choice by choice. And so we return to the question that lies beneath all others. Why are we here? The great religions offer their visions: creation, purpose, afterlife, union with the divine. Philosophy, more often, offers questions. But sometimes questions are more honest, more human. Perhaps the meaning of life is not found, but made, in kindness, in courage, in connection. In facing the silence of the cosmos not with fear, but with awe. In saying yes to existence, even when we do not understand it. We live inside a mystery. Time carries us forward, death awaits us, and yet, here we are, breathing, wondering, loving, losing, beginning again. Time, while invisible, leaves its trace in us, in our memories. We carry the past not in calendars, but in recollections. A scent that brings back childhood, a melody that reopens a long-closed chapter, a photograph that softens or sharpens with each passing year. Memory is the soul's archive, and yet, It is not a perfect recorder. It is a storyteller, often improvising. Philosophers have long wrestled with memory. Plato saw it as a form of anamnesis, the soul remembering truths it once knew before birth. In this view, learning is not discovery, but recollection. Centuries later, John Locke grounded identity in memory. The self, he argued, is not substance or soul, but continuity of consciousness. You are who you remember being. But this raises unsettling questions. What if memory fades? What if it lies? Are we still ourselves? Modern thinkers, like Henry Bergson, viewed time not as a line, but as duration, a qualitative experience. Time, for Bergson, is felt in rhythm, emotion, flow. It stretches and shrinks. A joyful hour flies. A moment of grief expands infinitely. This inner time, lived time, reveals something essential. We do not inhabit time like space. We swim in it. We dissolve in it. Yet for all our movement through time, there is only ever one true moment, now. The present is the doorway through which life enters. And yet, we so often miss it, lost in regret or anticipation. To be fully present is rare, but when it happens, it is profound. A breath, a gaze, a word can become eternal. In mindfulness traditions, this is the essence of awakening. To meet the present without grasping or fleeing. To say yes to this moment, just as it is. The poet T.S. Eliot captured this paradox beautifully. Time past and time future, what might have been and what has been, point to one end which is always present. In the stillness of the now, eternity touches time. And in that contact, we glimpse the sacred, not outside time, but within it. This brings us to the question of transcendence. Is there something beyond time? Beyond death? Some traditions say yes, an afterlife, a rebirth, a reunion with the divine. Others say no, but all grapple with the yearning, the sense that this life, though finite, points to something more. Perhaps not a place, but a quality, a mode of being that is timeless. Philosophy does not settle this. It cannot. But it does offer companions for the journey, voices that echo through the ages, reminding us that to live well is not to escape time, but to engage it with grace. To live in time, not as a prisoner, but as a pilgrim. Not with fear, but with reverence. We are all of us temporary, and yet, in our fleetingness, we touch what is eternal: love, truth, beauty, wonder. These do not last, but they live while they do, and that is enough. Who am I? It is a question as old as thought itself, and yet every time it is asked, it feels freshly profound. We speak of the self as if it were a solid thing, a core, a center, a stable identity. But when we look more closely, the self becomes more elusive. Is it your name, your memories, your personality? Is it your body, your brain, your roles in society? Or is it something deeper, your soul, your essence, your awareness? Western philosophy has offered many answers. Descartes famously declared, "Cogito, ergo sum." I think, therefore I am. For him, the act of thinking confirmed the existence of a self. Even if the world was an illusion, there had to be a thinker. Yet even Descartes admitted that this I was difficult to define. The thinking self had no clear edges, no features, just the undeniable flicker of consciousness. David Hume, centuries later, challenged this certainty. He looked inside and found no core, only a bundle of perceptions, ever shifting, without a true I to hold them together. Like a theatre without an actor, the mind is full of thoughts, feelings, images, but no permanent self behind the curtain. The self, he concluded, is a fiction, a habit, a useful convenience, but not a metaphysical fact. This view echoes powerfully in Buddhist philosophy, which has long denied the existence of a fixed self. In the doctrine of anatta, no self, Buddha taught that what we call the self is a collection of changing processes, sensations, emotions, thoughts, intentions. Clinging to this illusion causes suffering. Liberation comes not from finding the self, but from seeing through it. To awaken is to realize that we are not separate, not static, not solid. We are the unfolding. We are the river, not the stone. Yet, the illusion of self is strong and in many ways necessary. Our social world is built upon it. Legal systems, ethics, relationships, all assume personal identity and continuity. You sign your name, vote, remember your childhood, plan your future. You say, I, 1,000 times a day. And yet, underneath it all, there is the hum of uncertainty. What about memory? Many philosophers, like John Locke, have tied the self to memory. You are the person who remembers your past. But memories are malleable, partial, and sometimes false. People forget, distort, and even fabricate parts of their own stories. In cases of amnesia, brain injury, or dementia, the sense of self can fragment entirely. If the self can vanish with the flick of a neuron, was it ever truly there? Neuroscience adds another layer. Studies suggest that the brain constructs the sense of self through a network of processes, some conscious, many unconscious. There is no single place in the brain where the self lives. It is an emergent property, like a flame, real, but dependent on constant conditions. And when those conditions change, the self shifts or fades. Yet for all these insights, we still experience being someone. There is a felt sense of me-ness, not fixed, perhaps, but undeniable. A continuity, however fragile. A center that moves with us, even as its content evolves. This is not an argument for a soul, necessarily, but a recognition of subjectivity, the inner glow of awareness that lights up experience from within. And in this awareness, something beautiful happens. We begin to see that identity is not a prison, but a performance. Not a cage, but a canvas. You are not who you were 10 years ago. You will not be the same 10 years from now. You are a story being written, a process unfolding, a song in motion. The existentialists embraced this fluidity. Jean-Paul Sartre insisted that existence precedes essence, that we are not born with fixed natures, but shape ourselves through choices. We are condemned to be free, he said, and in that freedom lies both anxiety and possibility. Every act is a brushstroke on the self. Every decision creates the next chapter. And yet, no self exists alone. We are formed in relationship, in dialogue, in reflection, in the eyes of others. The philosopher Martin Buber spoke of the I-thou relationship, where the self meets another not as object, but as presence. In this sacred encounter, something beyond ego appears. The self becomes porous, the boundary softens, connection becomes revelation. In love, in art, in grief, we feel this deeply. The self dissolves, if only for a moment. We merge with music, with a sunset, with the sorrow of another. In those moments, we are not lost, we are more fully ourselves. Not the isolated self of fear or pride, but the open self of being. So perhaps the question is not, who am I, but how am I? Not what is my identity, but what is the quality of my presence? You are not a fixed object. You are not a single thought or memory. You are not your achievements, your failures, your roles. You are the awareness beneath them, the witness, the breath, the unfolding mystery. As we look deeper into the nature of identity, we find that the self is not a singular, sealed-off entity. It is profoundly relational. We are born into language, into culture, into a web of expectations and stories long before we speak our first word. We learn to say I by hearing others say you. Our sense of self is formed not in isolation, but in reflection. It is shaped by family, by history, by the values of our time and place. Philosopher Charles Taylor speaks of the dialogical self, a self that emerges through conversation, through mutual recognition. To become a person is to be seen as a person, to be acknowledged, named, responded to. Our thoughts are not formed in solitude. They are echoes, revisions, improvisations within a broader chorus. Even when we speak to ourselves, we borrow the voice of the other. But not all voices are gentle. Society also imposes identities, race, gender, class, nationality. These categories carry weight. They can empower, but also confine. They can offer belonging or marginalization. The philosopher Frantz Fanon described the pain of being seen not as a person, but as a symbol, as black in a white gaze, as stereotype rather than soul. Identity, he showed, is often contested terrain, a place of struggle, resistance, and renewal. This tension has given rise to philosophies of liberation, feminist thought, critical race theory, queer theory, post-colonial studies, all of which ask, who gets to define the self? Who has the power to speak, to be heard, to matter? These philosophies do not erase the self, but reclaim it. They honor experience, affirm complexity, and challenge systems that deny dignity. Yet in acknowledging our social identities, we must also remember their fluidity. You are not only one thing. You are not only where you were born, what you look like, how others label you. The self is multiple, layered, shifting, sometimes contradictory. You can be tender and fierce, joyful and grieving, rooted and searching. Your identity is a mosaic, not a monolith. Some thinkers, like William James, embraced this multiplicity. He wrote of the pluralistic universe, a cosmos where truth and selfhood are not fixed, but evolving. In this view, the self is not a unity to be discovered, but a harmony to be composed. You are not a puzzle to be solved, you are a poem to be lived. Others turn to spirituality to explore the self beyond personality. In Hindu philosophy, the Atman, the deepest self, is not individual but universal. It is the soul beneath all masks, the spark of divinity that connects all beings. In the Advaita Vedanta tradition, the highest realization is not I am this or I am that, but I am, pure being, without form, without boundary. Mystics across cultures echo this insight. In Christian mysticism, Meister Eckhart spoke of a God beyond images, a self beyond ego. In Sufism, Rumi wrote of becoming a drop in the ocean, not lost, but returned to the source. In Zen Buddhism, the self dissolves into emptiness, and yet in that emptiness, everything is held. These traditions suggest that the self is not an end point, but a doorway, that beyond identity lies essence, not something to possess, but something to participate in. Not who are you, but what flows through you when you are still. To walk this path is not to deny identity, but to hold it lightly, to honor the stories we carry while knowing we are more than our roles, to wear the name, but remember the silence beneath it, to speak, but also to listen, to the wind, to the body, to the quiet within. And so the self is not a prison, nor a possession. It is a rhythm, a relationship, a revelation. It is the dance between the inner and the outer, the past and the present, the many and the one. You are not what others say you are. You are not what your fears whisper. You are not even the thoughts you think. You are the space in which they move. You are the awareness that watches, that questions, that loves. As we come to the edge of what philosophy can say about the self, something strange begins to happen. Words grow quiet. Concepts blur. The question, who am I, dissolves, not into answers, but into stillness. And in that stillness, something vast opens, something deeper than personality, more intimate than thought. In the traditions of contemplative philosophy, the self is not a noun, but a verb. Not a thing, but a process. In Taoism, this process is called Wu Wei, effortless action, the flow of life moving through you without obstruction. The Tao is not something you find. It is something you stop resisting, and in surrendering to it, the self becomes translucent. You become like water, clear, adaptable, open to what is. In Zen, this dissolution is even more radical. The self is a mask, a dream. Enlightenment is the moment when the dreamer wakes up. But what awakens is not a better self. It is the absence of self, the pure awareness that was always there, hidden behind the noise. In the silence of meditation, thoughts rise and fall like waves. But you are not the waves, you are the ocean. You are the space in which everything appears. This insight is not just metaphysical, it is liberating. When we stop clinging to identity, we stop defending, comparing, grasping. We become less afraid, less rigid, more available to life. A stranger smiles and we feel warmth without calculation. A tree sways and we feel its rhythm in our breath. We are no longer me looking at that. We are this moment, this seeing, this being. In the West, such experiences are often framed in the language of mysticism. Plotinus, the Neoplatonist, spoke of the soul's ascent toward the One, a reality beyond form, where all distinctions dissolve. The journey is not upward, but inward, not towards something new, but toward what has always been, a return, not a discovery. Modern thinkers have hinted at this too. The philosopher Alan Watts described the self as a play, a performance by the universe pretending to be many things when in truth it is one. You are not a separate ego, he said. You are the whole cosmos, looking out through a particular pair of eyes. The illusion is separation. The truth is unity, but this unity is not abstraction. It is profoundly tender. To realize the illusory nature of the self is not to dismiss life. It is to love it more deeply, to see yourself in all things and all things in yourself. To touch the infinite not by rising above the world, but by entering it more fully, with softness, with presence, with awe. And still, the self returns. The name, the story, the habits. We wake, we eat, we speak our roles, but something has shifted. We no longer believe the mask is all there is. We can wear it, even dance with it without becoming lost in it. This is the great paradox of the self. It is both illusion and expression, both boundary and bridge, both ephemeral and eternal. You are not who you think you are, but you are also not nothing. You are this flicker of awareness, this fleeting moment, this unfolding wonder. You are not apart from life. You are its unfolding. You are not separate from others. You are the space in which connection becomes possible. You are not only a self, you are also the silence beneath the self. And in that silence, there is peace. Not the peace of final answers, but the peace of release, of resting in what is, without needing to define it, of knowing, not as knowledge but as intimacy, that you are held, that you are home. In the end, philosophy is not just about answers, it is about attention. It teaches us how to look, how to listen, how to live with questions so deep that they remake us, not through certainty, but through wonder. We have journeyed through many realms. We've pondered the origins of existence, the limits of knowledge, the foundations of morality. We've sat with death, with freedom, with the ache of identity and the shimmer of beauty. And perhaps what we've found is not a final truth, but something more subtle, a way of being. To be philosophical is not to withdraw from life. It is to enter it more fully, to see not only the surface of things, but the depth, the fragility, the interconnectedness. It is to pause before speaking, to question before judging, to wonder before deciding. Socrates once said that the unexamined life is not worth living. But perhaps it's also true that the over-examined life, the one obsessed with perfect clarity, can become sterile. Wisdom is not found in overthinking. It is found in the balance between reason and feeling, between analysis and awe, between knowing and not knowing. There is a kind of peace that comes with accepting uncertainty, the recognition that we are not here to master life, but to meet it. Each day, each breath, each moment is a question. And the answer is not something we say, it is how we respond, with courage, with curiosity, with care. This is what the ancients called phronesis, practical wisdom. Not knowledge stored in books, but understanding lived in action. The quiet dignity of someone who walks gently, speaks truthfully, forgives easily. The person who listens more than they speak, who chooses kindness when it costs, who acts not from ego, but from love. And love, ultimately, may be the deepest answer philosophy can offer. Not sentimental love, but the expansive love that sees the sacred in all things. The love that holds contradiction, that honors complexity, that makes space for the stranger, the broken, the unknown. This love does not erase suffering, but it transforms how we meet it. It gives us strength, not to conquer, but to remain open, to endure, to offer ourselves as light, however small, in a world that is often shadowed. Philosophy, then, is not an escape. It is a return to presence, to humility, to the fullness of being. It teaches us how to fall in love with the real, with this earth, this body, this fleeting life, to find in the ordinary the echo of the infinite. You do not need to solve life. You do not need to understand it all. You need only to be here, to stay awake, to keep your heart soft. Ask your questions, follow your wonder, let the world surprise you, and in the quiet spaces between your thoughts, remember, you are not lost. You are already home.